Alrighty, I think we're going to get started. Good morning, everyone. My name is Will DiMaggio. I'm a senior advisor at the Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice, and very pleased to welcome folks to the launch of our Decarbonizing New York City Co-ops report. This is a report that captures, the outcomes of a 2-day technical assistance panel. This was held here at BX back in May of 2025, really looking at and addressing some of the major barriers to decarbonization for our city's largest limited equity cooperatives as they work to comply over time with Local Law 97. So we're really thrilled to share some of the outcomes of this report. A little bit of housekeeping before we begin. There will be a Q&A session at the end of this discussion. So just hold your questions till then. There will be about 15 minutes for both folks in the room and online. There will also be a QR code that's displayed up here, but we'll circulate a link to folks, all registrants, so they can get access to the report after this session. So just in a moment, I'll invite some of the TAP members up for a brief presentation on the report and some of the recommendations. Jen Leone from HPD, Jared Rodriguez from Emergent Urban Concepts, and also Rebecca Poole from CNYC. Then they will be joined for a panel, John Myers from HRNA, who will be moderating, along with Jared Samantha Pierce from HCR, and also Ryan Dziak from Penn South. But before that, we'll hear from our Executive Director at MOCJ, Elijah Hutchinson, to provide some brief framing and opening remarks, and also from Katie Chen at ULI just to kick things off. So thanks so much. I really appreciate everyone attending, and looking forward to the conversation.
Hi, good morning. So good to see everybody. So I am Elijah Hutchinson. I'm the Executive Director of the Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice. And we are the sponsor for the technical assistance panel produced with ULI, and we're just so thrilled to share with you the findings that we have today. I wanted to give a special thank you to ULI for the stellar cast of experts who have brought us together, offering diverse perspectives and really a shared dedication. This work, as you know, is professional. It's also personal. There is a lot of that we've learned from the times when we started Local Law 97 to where we are today. And it's really important to have spaces where we can continue to come together and really talk through what the issues are, what the city's doing, and have more transparent and dedicated conversations to address the things that we hear loud and clear from the public often on not just Local Law 97, but a lot of our climate initiatives and objectives. So I really just want to thank the Building Energy Exchange and ULI for creating a space to have these conversations and bring us all together. Because if we've learned anything over the past few months, it's going to be that coalitions are going to be incredibly important. Bringing people together and being honest about what is going on is going to be super important. And we all need to support each other throughout this in order to move the work forward. That is going to be super important. I especially want to thank the TAP members. I remember when we started this exercise in the spring, in a smaller room in the back, I started out with my remarks, and as soon as it ended, we had a lot of anxious questions about what we were all doing here and what was the purpose of this work. And so I'm so excited to be here today to get into the details about what was reflected in these conversations and some actionable steps and progress that we can make going forward. As you all know, large co-ops and condos and cooperatives are a big part of New York City's housing legacy and are a critical asset for everyday New Yorkers, working class New Yorkers across New York City. And it's really important that we get all of these policies right so that we understand exactly who it impacts, who's benefiting, and how these resources are being dedicated. That is fundamental to how we think about environmental justice and what we need to do. It's all about how do we get there and what are the ways in which we can actually catalyze change, not just setting up targets, not just setting up goals and visions, but providing resources and providing infrastructure so that people can do the work that we're asking them to do. I want to also note that the way we look at Local Law 97 within our office is not just about the climate targets itself, but we live in a world where over 500 New Yorkers die from heat-related illnesses every year. We live in a world where asthma is very high in some of our environmental justice neighborhoods, but air quality is a big issue. So I see these as not just climate, not just building laws, but really public health laws that are going to improve our air quality, improve our housing quality, and make this ultimately a better place for New Yorkers to live and thrive in our neighborhoods across the city. So thank you so much for coming here today to hear about the results of this work. I'm really encouraged to see us coming together to have the tough conversations, and I look forward to continuing to try to shepherd this change through and make it happen. So thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here today. I'm Katie Chen, one of the chairs of ULI New York's Technical Assistance Panel, or TAP. For anyone unfamiliar, ULI, Urban Land Institute, is one of the oldest and largest global network of real estate and land use professionals. Our members come from every corner of the industry, from public and private sectors alike, and we're united by a shared mission, shaping the future of the built environment to make a lasting and positive impact in our communities. One of the ways that ULI supports this mission is through TAPs. TAPs bring together our members' collective expertise to help cities, agencies, and community organizations tackle tough land use and development issues. So land use also leads an initiative called the Net Zero Imperative, a program that's aimed at speeding up decarbonization in the built environment. Since 2021, NZI has helped local governments and building owners explore ways to reduce carbon emissions through technical assistance and collaboration. So last year, we collaborated with MOCEJ to obtain a grant from ULI's Net Zero Imperative to convene a TAP focus on Local Law 97 with the goal of helping New York City's largest limited equity housing co-ops to overcome barriers to compliance. So months of planning led up to this two-day workshop in the spring, where a team of experts came together to develop practical recommendations. I'm really excited for you all to hear what they came up with through today's report launch and panel. And on the behalf of ULI New York, I want to extend our sincerest thanks to MOCEJ for their incredible partnership and dedication in pulling all of this together, to John Myers, chair of this TAP, and our incredible panelists for volunteering their time and expertise to craft real solutions, and to the Building Energy Exchange for generously hosting us today. And if this work sparks any ideas for your own communities, our TAP call for proposals is now open. We'd love to hear from you and brainstorm ideas on how a TAP can help answer any questions or issues that you're interested in exploring. You can join an info session on October 29th to learn more about how to get involved. And once again, thank you to all who were involved in this TAP, and I'm really looking forward to an engaging conversation and session ahead, and also the collective impact that we can make beyond today. Thank you so much.
My name is Rebecca Poole, and I'm from the Council of New York Cooperatives and Condominiums. I'd like to say how grateful we are to the Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice, particularly Will, Joe, and Elijah, for putting together this ULI TAP and for continuously collaborating with the cooperatives and condominiums that have to comply with Local Law 97 in an attempt to understand the obstacles that face us. CMYC has always been happy to participate in these types of programs, aiding collaboration and partnership between government and co-op and condo homeowners. The TAP process was intense and engaging, and unlike anything I've participated in before, First, we started off with a framing of the questions and briefing materials. I know that the people involved from ULI interviewed a ton of co-op and condo board members as part of that process, including buildings that ended up within the TAP itself. They prepared briefing materials. We had a pre-panel meeting to review those, and then that was followed by an intensive 2-day technical assistance panel where we hashed out what the problems were, we brainstormed, we moved things around, and we developed potential solutions for what previously had appeared to be problems that couldn't be solved. That has led us to today, which is the final TAP presentation, and I guess after this, the release of the TAP report. Special thank you to Jonathan Myers and fellow panelists Alicia Fernandez, William Kalbacher, Derek Kowalczyk, Jennifer Leone, Jeff Perlman, Samantha Pierce, and Jared Rodriguez. The amount of expertise and experience in the room was tremendous, and I think Alicia and I learned a lot about different ways that we could look at this problem. An opportunity. So the study questions that we were asked to approach by the mayor's office were technical barriers to implementing Local Law 97. What were common proposed upgrades? How could they be phased over time? And how to validate current technical solutions. Funding barriers, which is probably the largest problem facing co-ops particularly, but also condominiums. And what different solutions to those common barriers were. And we had many discussions on how funding works, because funding in co-ops and condos is very different from funding of private homes and properties. And lastly, regulatory barriers. What policy actions could help reduce regulatory friction, such as overlapping regulations to pursue Local Law 97 compliance. As part of the TAP process, we also had the privilege of touring Penn South, who is represented here today. And we conducted stakeholder interviews with Morningside, with Penn South, with Amalgamated. I know there's more, I'm forgetting, with a lot of other co-op board members. And then move toward to the panel deliberations and the final recommendations, which you'll see here today, which we're very excited about as a definite first step toward progress.
Like, is this me? Thanks, everybody, for coming. So I'll get into the meat of what we actually did when we met in this room for an ungodly amount of hours. So we spent a lot of time either talking amongst ourselves or actually reaching out to co-op owners and other folks that are participating in the marketplace and identifying technical issues, financial issues, regulatory issues that these housing organizations are facing, trying to achieve compliance with Local Law 97. They're pretty unique issues to this particular cohort of buildings and housing organizations, right? So technical issues, some of the equipment, right, that is regulated under Local Law 97 from an emissions perspective is either relatively new or it has some years left in useful life. So there's a discussion and I think a real concern over stranded assets and issues around perhaps allowing some of this equipment to run to the end of its useful life. There's a need of the building, right, just from a full asset perspective. So like, where is the building from an asset perspective? What are the conditions of its facade or its roof? What's the condition of like housing conditions, right, inside folks' apartments? What is the general capital need? And framing Local Law 97 within that total capital need, I think, is critically important just from an equity perspective and to help with these folks who are really honestly capitally challenged, right? Like we could talk more about that. We need to focus on solution provider, vendor, and contractor capacity to actually deliver results. And so throughout the process, we sort of identified, and this isn't new, we identified gaps in the marketplace, right? And even just understanding out there in the marketplace to deliver proper solutions in the right order, in the right project prioritization for these buildings. So that shouldn't be a surprise, right? Decarbonization is still like new, and best practices aren't even established yet for specific building typologies. We need to leverage city resources, obviously, right? This is something that comes up for basically all needs, right? We need to have the city take a more engaging role in solving this particular issue. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And there's pressure to electrify buildings, but I would say the average person out there, the average resident, really doesn't understand why. And this idea that we're going to be electrifying buildings is counter to the narrative that's out there around the cost of electricity, and then also just counter to the narrative around the 1970s and 80s when everyone was going to electrify, and then it didn't happen. So why are we doing this now? Folks aren't necessarily connecting this to climate action yet in their minds. I know that's hard to believe. A lot of people in the room are entrenched in this in this marketplace, but the average person out there, especially in these co-ops, they're not connecting the dots, and we have to help them do that. From a financial issues perspective, giving more debt facility to these housing organizations is not necessarily the answer, because they might be fully leveraged already, and a lot of them are. So then what? How do we do things that might be off balance sheet, right? What's the order of debt subordination, right? What comes first? If we're going to lend to these buildings, the lending has to be subordinated to the primary mortgage, right? And so then how does that affect interest rates on lending and other issues relating to borrowing? Just unknown future energy costs. Again, we're hearing the electric industry sort of scream and yell that we're not prepared, the grid is not prepared, there's not enough electricity, there's all these things that are happening that are driving electric load. Is that real? Is it acute? Is it happening to us right now? We don't really know. We don't have a real view into this. So engaging with utilities, engaging with DPS and the Public Service Commission, and having everybody on the same page about where we have acute capacity limitations in the city, like mapped, is extremely important. And providing larger subsidies for early adopters is probably important so that we can start establishing this best practice. Other regulatory issues, and I'm going to try to go through this a little bit faster. Other local laws are really putting they're putting the squeeze on these housing organizations, like Local Law 11, right, the facade law. Just having a sidewalk bridge up for years in some cases is extremely expensive, and that's not to say how much it costs to repoint a 20-story brick campus, right? So we have some real issues around capital availability because they're being squeezed by other local laws. Electrification is incentivized, but non-electrification work is just as important. So what kind of prep work could be done that can support other decarb actions down the road? That needs to be just as important as actually just putting in heat pumps. And the emphasis has been put in heat pumps, and some of these co-ops have explored that, and they see some numbers that are extremely scary, right? And so us framing this as a 2050 issue right now is just not helpful. We're cutting off our nose to spite our faces, right? We have to frame this as an incremental change over time. We have 25 years to get there, and we need to work collectively to get there. So we all met. Oh, look, I'm in one of these pictures. We went in boiler rooms. We saw the chiller plant. Penn South is so interesting because it's completely islanded from the grid. They generate their own electricity. They generate their own cooling and send it to all the apartments via pipes underground. They generate all their heating and send it to apartments via pipes underground. And then they actually have control over every little fan coil unit in every apartment to attempt to make sure that this system is operating in concert. So they are among the best run co-ops, I would say, in New York. So we're going to be talking to maybe one of the best co-op managers as well, talking about some of the issues that they're facing. I think the key takeaway is if they can't make this work, we've got a really big problem, right? Because everybody else is just not as sophisticated as Penn South Co-op. I'm just going to say it, okay? So we have to make this work for everybody. So I want to do a little bit of a perspective shift. This is actually a picture of inside the boiler at Penn South. That thing is terrifying. It looks like, I don't even know, it's like the depths of hell or something. But people were literally just staring at it, and like you couldn't get them away from looking at this thing. That's literally the inside of a boiler, and the gas flame is like in a vortex heating this boiler. So just framing the conversation was really important, right? Like having everybody step back from, I just had an argument with somebody about their heating bill, right? And, how are we gonna do this? How are we gonna hit 2050? Like putting yourself in this sort of catastrophic mindset, you're never gonna come up with a solution because you're totally stressed out. Right, so we have to break this down into these incremental steps. So to fulfill the Local Law 97 mandate, to reduce carbon emissions from buildings in New York City and address the climate crisis is the main concern here. How do we do one step at a time to begin reducing emissions today instead of framing this catastrophically and saying we're going to reduce emissions in 2050, right? We need to start now, and there are some measures that folks can implement that will begin, sending us down the curve earlier than later. The longer we wait, the harder it's going to be. And then how do we also just maintain and enhance the quality and affordability, quality of life and affordability of housing for existing and future residents of New York City co-ops? Co-ops play this incredibly critical role in providing ownership affordability in New York City. There's almost no other way to do it. We haven't built a lot of co-ops recently. We might want to even start thinking about doing that again. It's a pathway into the middle class. It plays an extremely important role for people here in New York, and we have to take this issue very seriously. We can't lose co-ops because they can't invest in themselves. So there's a couple things here, right? And I mentioned a little bit. Like electrification overnight, yeah, great. Wonderful. We see some projects happen like that, and we should be lauding those projects. Those are awesome. New construction being all electric, viable. But electrification overnight for some of these cooperative buildings, it just ain't gonna happen. We need to be real about this. So what are the stepwise project prioritization, efforts that we could implement to begin electrification over time? Right? And we call that, and it's jargony, resource efficient decarbonization. And resource efficient from every perspective, right? Capital resource efficient, equipment resource efficient. Do we need to be putting this much copper in the ground to serve these buildings? Is that resource efficient? How are we actually getting this done in the right, smart, incremental way? Unpacking and reconnecting, interconnected agencies, coordination across agencies, this just isn't happening right now. It's really frustrating that we can't get effective coordination between housing organizations, either at the state or local level, the housing owners and the co-op owners themselves, and other entities that the city controls or the state controls to make something happen, right? And we can do that because we've done it a number of times. It's just this climate thing has been off on the side, and we haven't thought about it in the appropriate way. Maybe this is an economic development effort, right? Instead of an engineering emissions reduction effort. Maybe we need to be framing it like that. And building trust is just so important in co-ops. A co-op that doesn't trust itself and a co-op that doesn't trust its city is a literal damn mess. And we all know this, right? I was speaking to someone in the audience, she knows who she is, that lives in one of those. We can't afford to put some of these co-ops into a death spiral because we need them to be here because of the critical role that they play. So we want to create a cohort We want to pull these large co-ops that have common interest together, a common interest organization, so that they can support each other, right? We can support them to find a common solution, right? So a lot of these buildings are very similar to each other. One solution in one building could be a solution in another building. That's not to say that the buildings aren't snowflakes, right? And that the people in the buildings aren't snowflakes too, right? We could come up with an approach that's scalable and repeatable versus saying there's a specific solution for you in your building. We get in trouble when we try to shoehorn technology into buildings. A lot of folks know each other. There are organizations that spread across multiple co-op organizations, pull people together. That cohort could have leadership, right? It could be a single point of contact for the city. And various cohort organizational models can support this concept of neighborhood scale decarbonization and economic opportunities for those co-ops. Oftentimes the co-op, it's not just a campus on its own, it's the core of an entire neighborhood. So if we can begin decarbonizing that co-op, perhaps we're actually anchoring the decarbonization of an entire neighborhood, thinking about this across multiple sectors, thinking about this from an infrastructure perspective and an economic development perspective. So some additional benefits for the cohort-based approach: one-stop shop for Local Law 97 resources, right? You've heard this term before. Like, we didn't throw this around lightly. We really do want to have something that's effective at providing resources to this cohort. Economies of scale. Sometimes co-ops actually do join each other to go out to bid for certain services. Like, I've seen this happen for electric procurement, really interesting, gas procurement. That type of a joint bidding process could drive costs down. The ability to attract public resources. Again, these facilities are anchors for their neighborhoods. The city should be taking that seriously and seeing it as an opportunity to support the entire neighborhood. We could provide best-in-class expertise, right, to this large cohort, right, because it's bigger. There's more capacity to bring the top expertise to support it. Sharing key insights, obviously really important. Direct engagement with city administrators and even electeds, right? Like, when you have a giant body of voters, they can pull some levers to pull in resources, right? I think that's really important. So someone said building coalitions is going to be the name of the game. That's what we have to do here with co-ops. And transparent benchmarking. So how are they all doing, right, in relationship to each other as a cohort? I think that's really important. And then how is the entire cohort doing compared to the rest of the city? So some financial frameworks here. So this is sort of like the meat of some of the financial solutions that we were looking at. In terms of incentives, oftentimes you hear from utilities, there are so many programs that they're running that just aren't necessarily coordinated, right? So the utility runs an electrification program. They run an energy efficiency program. They run energy affordability programs. They have non-wires alternatives where they're trying to make investments in specific neighborhoods to reduce electric demand so that they don't have to build a $5 billion substation, right? In one of the solicitations that's out there right now, non-wires alternative from Con Edison, there are a lot of co-ops. It's the Lower East Side. But there's no one to gather all these co-ops together to jointly apply for very serious funding from Con Edison to drive down peaking electric demand inside that neighborhood. That's the problem here. If we had a cohort, we could actually solve some of this. Loans. PACE is sort of like infamous now. And we spent some time trying to figure out PACE. Really, like, it's an issue of debt subordination. So solving that problem could unlock PACE, right? But I'm not hanging my hat on PACE. Thinking about other credit enhancements from the city is sort of an interesting model that we could go deep into, I would say. And then off-balance sheet options, I think, is the thing that gets me most excited. The city already does this in lots of different ways. We don't ask everybody in the city to drill a water well, right? Or do their own wastewater treatment on site. All of that is off balance sheet. So why are we asking every building to heat themselves or cool themselves? Maybe we shouldn't. In fact, the rest of the world has kind of figured this out. We're one of the last, and we could talk more about that. So what does that mean? Could we create a DevCo, like a development company, that could be public, private, cooperative, or some mix that can deliver this for this cohort of co-ops, right? It would be focused on decarbonization in general. There's some specific sort of solutions or pathways inside of that that a development company could produce. And what we could do is find commonalities between the buildings, pull resources, have that one-stop shop of best-in-class expertise, right? Best practices to do planning, design, and implementation of solutions. I think this is really important. Again, we already do this in New York City, right? We have local development corporations and other joint organizations that solve really complex problems for neighborhoods and for entire boroughs and for the city itself. We can do really complex things when we think like this. So we could talk more about that. And then some of the other regulatory financing tools are related to zoning. I think we can get into that a little bit more. Other strategic decarbonization projects relating to infrastructure, and obviously extending J51 is really important. So I'm going to pass this on to the next person.
All right, thanks, Jared, for leaving me 5 minutes for the rest of the presentation. Let's see what I can do with that. All right, I'm going to talk a little bit about training and education, which is obviously the third wheel, third leg in getting all of this done. Jared talked about it. There's a lot of solutions, but there are so many people who are responsible in a co-op and condo structure, co-ops particularly, so a lot of knowledge has to be disseminated. Something that we think is really critical is creating a toolkit for this RED, resource efficient decarbonization, right? People need to understand what we're talking about and what buildings need to do to get to 2050 over time, right? And this kind of documentation has to talk about the technical side, the financial side. We think there's interaction between this kind of workflow and other city requirements like Local Law 87 reports, which I'll touch on in a second, and just more playbooks. Like we need data, we need examples that building teams and co-ops can look to. Again, not all buildings are a little bit of a snowflake, but I have a really bad metaphor, I'll mention it later, but we just need all of this, practicable and usable for everyone else to share on. And a charrette process, right? There's got to be a way to do a duplicative process, right? To walk different co-ops or cohorts through a kind of sane decarbonization strategy with all the pieces and parts, right? It really does require getting a lot of people, experts, non-experts, in the room talking about strategies. A couple other elements, and then my last couple slides are summaries. I might not even have to do them, but a couple things that we talked about in our meeting in that back room last spring is really looking, aggregating, and analyzing building data. It's really important to start with knowing about your building, your campus, et cetera. So it's energy, deferred investments, also the capacity of the shareholders, like what can this building reasonably do is really contingent on a lot of factors. I mentioned it before, but we need more case studies of buildings, especially very large co-ops who've done this before, right? It's really hard to imagine through what a good, successful outcome is going to be without seeing how somebody else has achieved it and or struggled through it. That's really important. And then training, right? I said it before on the previous slide, we need to educate people on how to do this, what it means, and so on. And that is everybody in the whole ecosystem of decarbonization, shareholders, contractors, finance partners who don't really understand this either, right? There's just a lot of gaps and a lot of training to tie all these people together. Last thing, and as a city person, we just want to mention a couple of regulatory alignment strategies that came up in the cohort. Jared mentioned some of these, right? But we have a lot of regulations in New York City around climate. You all know about these. We all struggle through multiple filings, multiple timelines, a lot of duplicative requirements, and so on. Some of them are not duplicative, but are synergistic, right? So trying to work through reform and/or consolidation of requirements will really help, right? Why do 7 things when you can do 1 thing where all the pieces talk together? Also, we came out with a recommendation that the city would recognize long-term decarbonization plans as a way to comply, right? It's really, really difficult for all buildings to commit to an every 5-year plan, right? That would literally mean you're working all the time nonstop through 2050. It doesn't always work that way. Funding doesn't work that way. Capital needs don't work that way. So we think it's really important to come up with an approach for a strategic long-term decarbonization strategy that would count for compliance so long as decarbonization really does happen, right? These are not fantasy plans we're talking about. They're real implementable strategies, and they need a lot of thought to be realistic. And finally, Jared mentioned enabling upgrades and all the support work that has to happen to predate electrification, and we have to make sure that those kind of items are fundable, but also they don't, hinder decarbonization strategies, right? You got to be able to get those things done, approved, and so on. So we just have to make sure that these benefits are accounted for, from a regulatory perspective, efficiency, grid capacity, resiliency, right? It's not just decarbonization. There are a lot of factors. All of them are beneficial to the city as well, and they need to be addressed. That touches a little bit the issue of large co-ops who have their own power generation plants, right? Those are totally different animals. They're snowstorms, not snowflakes maybe. But they also provide neighborhood benefits and other things to the city. It's really hard also to decarbonize a building with a giant power plant. It's an expensive process and not always maybe the most logical thing to do on a local Law 97 timeline. And last thing on the regulatory alignment is, again, with this cohort context, trying to get a whole bunch of people together to negotiate a settlement pathway or a compliance pathway for this kind of cohort, like all the cogen plants trying to negotiate with the city for a reasonable strategy that works for them. I'm really gonna breeze through key takeaways because that is what we should be talking about in this panel, right? But the strategy and planning gap we talked about, the phasing and prioritizing decarbonization as a long-term strategy. We need more pilots, and we need to talk about them. We need data, case studies, and so on. And finally, one we're really excited about is sharing the technical assistance across cohorts. Again, all these buildings are similar, same learnings, a lot of parallel tracks. Not every co-op or campus needs to be doing this separately. In fact, that's totally detrimental to the goals of getting decarbonization done. Funding, right, underlying mortgages, capital cycles, we all know about this, but Local Law 97 doesn't focus on that nearly enough. City and state resources getting unlocked, capital stacking, and then really these regulatory pieces I just mentioned, right, like the long-term thinking, engaging with the city, and trying to come up with alternative long-term strategies for getting buildings into compliance rather than out of compliance and paying penalties. Really with really specific programs and protocols for the buildings that we're talking about in this cohort. And right, next steps, select a cohort, deploy the toolkits, which obviously need a lot of work to make them happen, and figure out new sources of funding and technical assistance, which includes paying for technical assistance for these cohorts. That's it. I know I said a lot of things really quickly, but now we have a really interesting panel, and we hope to see really good questions to the panel, and good ideas come through this discussion.
You want to sit? Want to sit in the middle? I'll sit next to you.
Fantastic. Thank you, everybody, and thanks again to ULI, Building Energy Exchange, and MOCEJ for bringing us all together. My name is John Myers. I'm a partner with HR&A Advisors. I was the chair of this TAP, which somebody gave me the analogy was like being a knitter. I contributed very little, but I brought a whole bunch together, I hope. And it was an incredibly I guess, uplifting experience. I feel like we're in a moment where conversations that feel somewhat optimistic are better than the alternatives, and I very much appreciated this group. I want to let Samantha and Ryan start by introducing themselves, because those are the two folks you have not met yet, and then we're going to jump in. I've got some questions, but really want to hear from the collective wisdom of the room here as well. So, Samantha, you want to introduce yourself quickly?
Hi, everyone. I'm Samantha Pierce. I'm the Vice President of Sustainability for New York State Homes and Community Renewal, and we're the state's housing agency. So I have a very similar job to Jen, if you're familiar with her work, but on the state side.
And then, Ryan, do you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm the general manager at Penn South, which was used as a site visit template for this TAP.
Wonderful. And Jared and Rebecca, you have already met, and so we're going to dive right in. I want to make sure that we have time, again, for both some of my questions and some of yours. So I want to start at sort of core principles here, which is a bunch of our work coalesced around this conversation about buildings, the people who live in the buildings and maintain the buildings, and the money that brings all of that together. And Ryan, if I can put you a little bit on the spot and start with you, and since Jared said it, and I'll say it because I'm sure you won't, I think we all agree that Penn South is sort of an outlier in terms of both the investments you've already made, and frankly, I say this as a co-op board member myself, the level of professionalism at a management and sort of energy management level that you bring. But can you just start by giving us a really quick sense of the efficiency investments at a high level that you've made, and Jared highlighted a few of them, but what would it mean for you to fully decarbonize that campus as it stands right now?
Okay, thank you.
I have a microphone.
It's yes, everybody else but me has a little body mic on. So.
Microphone.
Okay.
Oh, maybe
Right.
our microphones aren't on.
Is it green light?
Go ahead.
Okay. So Penn South is a unique property in Chelsea neighborhood of Manhattan. We were developed in 1958 and opened in 1962. It was developed as a walk-to-work community because of the proximity to the garment workers industry. And the original funding for the loan that built Penn South came out of the pension fund from the International Ladies Workers Garment Union. It was a collaboration between government and private funding to build affordable housing. We are an Article 5, which is from the private housing finance law, different from a Mitchell-Lammer, slightly. We are the last redevelopment. The initial mortgage amortization was a 25-year amortization, and then it was up in 1986, and then again in 2011, and the community voted overwhelmingly to remain affordable. So future generations can have affordable housing in Midtown Manhattan. And it was a very unique trend at the time because a lot of our sister co-ops that were redevelopments decided to go private and sell to the open market. So Penn South has invested a lot of resources and been a good player and actor in the environment and our footprint on the environment. We gravitated off of the grid coming out of the 1970s because of the oil embargo and the extreme increase in utility costs at the time. We had an average budget around $300,000. I was not the manager at that time. And it soared to over $1 million. With no other choices, the board took the initiative to move forward with co-generating our power plant. The power plant was already built and handled the thermal side of the operation, but now we need to incorporate an electrical generation side. And so we progressed in 1986. We went full cogen and disconnected from the grid. The standby cost to remain on the grid was just not something we could afford. So since then, we've run a very efficient operation. We produce electricity at 14 cents a kilowatt. We offer our shareholders a discount. If their monthly bill goes up $1, we hear it. Connecting back to the grid, it'll probably be tenfold from that, what the shareholders will actually have to pay. So over time, we've participated in a lot of the programs. We did the toilet rebate program. We did 27,000 windows. We did in 1996, changed all the windows. We did a lot of initiatives as far as enhancing the plant. We had to meet with NESHAP Bryce requirements on the exhaust for carbon monoxide emissions. We augmented our exhaust system on all 10 engines that we have. In 2001, we started instituting and installing gas engines. We had a diesel operation solely prior to that. And then we started, in 2015, we started incorporating biofuel for a lot of our diesel engines and put in new boilers that are biofuel. We changed out our chillers to electrified chillers to help with our emissions. And we progressed slowly. Local Law 38 affects us, not so much other properties, because we produce electricity. So we have to come off of diesel fuel as a primary source of generation of electricity. So we're currently in the process of instituting natural gas engines and taking all our diesels offline, except for emergency use only.
Ryan, I don't mean to push you forward, but have you as a building, while I'm filling out my application to try to figure out a way to move in, have you as a building looked at an order of magnitude, what it would cost to decarbonize that system or a different system, if that would be the direction you'd have to go? Do you have an order of magnitude sense of that?
Yeah, so we commissioned a study to reconnect back to the grid as a sensitivity study that we would need to be able to help educate our shareholders, elected officials, and government officials. And just to reconnect back to the grid is about $16 million for us. But that's only the electric side of it. If we want to electrify the thermal side, that's an additional $20 million. And if we want to get rid of the gas appliances, we'd have to upgrade all the utility lines that go into and feed all our 15 22-story buildings, and that's another $40 million. And then we looked into, and we are studying and in the process of cladding the buildings and changing out the windows in a system that's hermetically seals the building for efficiency, and we're looking at $70 million for that.
Great.
So
okay. Thank you.
Hundreds of millions of dollars is the
a
answer.
very large number. Maybe I'm going to withdraw my application. Rebecca, I want to shift to you if I can, because you represent a very broad diversity of co-ops and condos throughout the city. How representative, again, Penn South is starting from, frankly, probably several steps ahead of most of the rest of us, but how representative do those investment requirements and sort of investment difficulties sound to you from the position that you bring?
Thanks, John. I think that Penn South is fairly representative of co-ops in general, in that, and especially the co-ops that participated in the TAP, in that they have engaged board, a very engaged and experienced board, knowledgeable, terrific manager, who has spent a lot of time investing in reports and studies and audits to determine how they can comply with Local Law 97, given their existing capital situation. There are many differences between Penn South, size for starters, income restrictions, et cetera. Some of the buildings in the TAP are restricted in increasing maintenance and assessments, so they have different amounts of freedom. Cogen, being off-grid, obviously sets them apart. But the cost to an average homeowner in New York City, I was with a building in Queens, a normal co-op, 3 weeks ago. It's about, $700 a unit if they were to extend that over 10 years, just to get to the starting point. For a household, anywhere between $25,000 and $60,000 a household in order to perform decarbonization work. Mm-hmm. So financially out of reach for almost all of our members.
Great. I want to shift gears a little bit and Samantha, sort of touch on something that I think both Rebecca and Ryan were getting at, and I know is part of your work, which is, on the one hand, I think a huge amount of investment has already been made, and I know both the state and the city, through regulated housing finance programs, have been making efficiency investments for a very long time. So I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about that, and then also I think the balance between making sure that as these investments are undertaken, that they are not doing so, on the backs of tenant affordability or housing quality, I think, as both points that were raised in the presentation. So can you just talk a little bit about some of the efforts that have been underway for many years at this point and how those are working?
Sure. Yeah, I think it's a really interesting place to sit right now, thinking about the programs that my agency currently offers, and I know there's some mirrored programs at HPD as well. So we offer sort of a up to $25,000 or $37,000 a unit fund through our Climate Friendly Homes Fund for decarbonization. So as you heard from Rebecca, that's, we're sort of in the lower end of the need to decarbonize a property. And those funds are somewhat recently available in the market right now. We've really just started working on some bigger buildings. And so I think we've really tried to take this approach of looking at making a program that can work for lots of different housing types, condos and co-ops included, but also serving a larger market, which sometimes then makes barriers to entry, specifically for condos and co-ops, slightly more challenging. And those programs are really designed to work, as you heard from the presentation from our panelist colleagues earlier, along with other refi work. And I think one of the gaps in the market right now that I can sort of acutely see from my perspective is that funding for how do you develop a long-term plan over time. The programs we run are really great for properties, maybe like the Penn Souths, that have a plan, know what work has to happen in them, and is just looking for the financing to do that. And right now in the market, that's sort of the money that's available across the board, is the money to do the work for somebody who already has the plan. And so I think as we're thinking about how can we as a state support, both the work that we're talking about in this report, as well as what do we look forward for in the future, we're really thinking about that strategic electrification over time and how do we come up with funding sources to help support that work. And so I think you're seeing some new programs from NYSERDA come out that are really providing some of that funding around just the strategic planning support, not for the capital dollars. We're really also trying to increase, one of the other programs my agency and my unit runs is our weatherization assistance program, which we've really tried to start expanding and aligning with the state's goals of decarbonization to recognize that those dollars can be used as preliminary or like step one work to bring down the overall energy efficiency burden of a property before we start electrifying. And so we've really shifted that program into a weatherization services program that's expanded a bit more of what we're being able to offer through the different funding sources that we have. So really trying to take a strategic approach on getting the funds out in a more efficient way, but also recognizing there's some limitations to those existing programs.
Great. I want to pick up on something that you said, and Jared, I want to ask you a question here. There's a lot of conversation in the report, and you were just raising it now, Samantha, about kind of long-term planning, about a capital cycle, and about systems. And in the report, I think we've used the word alignment probably many, many times because it's about aligning both the money and the need. But Jared, I guess I want to ask you, it's easy to say that, right? But I don't know when my boiler's going to break. And so what does that look like in practice, and how do you work with, again, a building which is a group of people at the end of the day. And how do you do that? How do you think about the building itself as people, the building itself as a set of systems, and what does alignment really look like in practice?
Right. So what I usually do with a co-op, if I'm actually implementing something like this, is we do together like a tabletop exercise, and we start to understand like what is the actual asset need in the building, right? Like what's the condition of the roof? What is the building? How is heat moved throughout the building? How's cooling done? How's cooling moved throughout the building or throughout the campus? How are you actually generating? What's the energy consumption pattern across the year through different seasons or even across the week or across the day? Like, let's just understand what the building is. Sometimes you'll find that the folks that are on the co-op board, right, or maybe folks that are on an energy committee or even folks managing the building don't actually know what the building is. So that's the first step. Everyone needs to have a collective understanding of what the building really actually is and what's its current condition. So this is part of that resource-efficient decarb process, right? And I would encourage everybody to visit a website called retrofitplaybook.org, retrofitplaybook.org, Building Energy Exchange, and NYSERDA, and the Empire Building Challenge to kind of start to understand this. So that's just step one, like what is the building? And then step two is, sure, we know where we need to go in broad strokes, right? Like we have to get fossil fuel out of the building. But we're not going to focus on that right now, right? Let's think about principles that can guide us identifying short-term measures that we actually can implement today. Like no regrets measures that are accretive to the ultimate goal, right? To that end state, without fixating on the actual end state. Because if we fixate on the end state, again, we get lots of anxiety and we seize up, especially with a co-op board. So we have to avoid doing that. Thinking catastrophically is not helpful. Thinking incrementally, baby steps, is really helpful when it comes to this kind of a process. This isn't just applicable to co-ops, it's applicable to every single building and the folks that are decision makers for buildings, right? So that's where you start. Right? And so each time, if this is sort of like a phased type of effort, each time you come back to the table, maybe you do it, right, you do it today, and you have a 3-year plan, then you come back in 3 years, you do the same exercise, and then you have a 3-year plan. Each 3-year plan is going to be different, right? It's incrementally more progressive. You have more things that you're having to tackle. It gets harder and harder to do as you get further out, but guess what? There's newer and newer solutions that emerge in each 3-year block. So this is really, really important. This is just one sort of principle, I think, really that you should internalize, that you're coming back to the table and you're figuring out your 3-year plan and you're doing your short-term, most implementable projects. I think that's the basic takeaway for the start of that kind of a process. And then the process goes on. There's like a lot of other steps after that.
Great. That's a really helpful introduction. And I think, Ryan, that leads me to a question that I suspect you probably think a lot about, which is how do you have these conversations with building residents, with boards? Again, most of us who live in co-ops don't have the benefit of a highly professionalized management structure as you do. Are you talking about this as, here's how this is going to make your life better? Are you talking about it as here's what this is going to cost us? How do you broach these conversations with, in your case, an extraordinarily diverse group of residents?
At Penn South, the residents are very environmentally conscious, so it's not a heavy lift to introduce any kind of initiative. The heavy lift is on the financial part, and that's where the anxiety is occurring and happening. For example, we went through and we changed all the lights to LED lights, and since we're disconnected from the grid, we don't get many benefits from NYSERDA. We're not eligible for it. So we foot those bills ourselves, and it was an easy ask of the community to pay for those initiatives because they saw the benefit. We even have annual block party, swap meets kind of thing, and we have a committee of the board that hands out LED light bulbs in exchange for an incandescent light bulb, to promote the cost savings on a micro level. Part of the frustration is that we went through best practices at that time. In 2012 to 2015, we did a whole HVAC upgrade in our community, changing all the risers, fan coil units, so on and so forth. We took on a huge debt, $150 million, and we have a HUD insured mortgage for that, which adds more complexities to any subordinate debt options for the future. And there was a HVAC assessment assigned to that. Now we're going to go back to them and say, hey, we're going to rip out all that stuff, and we're going to add more debt. So it's a difficult conversation.
Could I just add something?
Absolutely.
Please do not rip it out. Because, I mean, one of the other things that we also say is like, you're actually in pretty good shape. Like, you want to say that early. Like, here you are compared to your 2025 emissions profile, right, for Local Law 97. Like, you're actually doing something a little bit right. You're operating a thermal energy network throughout this campus, and that thermal energy network has really interesting opportunities for decarbonization. So again, this framing of like, you have some assets that are really important and valuable, right? That let's figure out how that's transforming over time, versus saying, we're going to rip everything out. Like, please do not say that, because people are going to clam up.
And if
right?
I can add too, like on the program side, we really heard that message loud and clear. I feel like the first year or two we were running our programs, we were like, oh, you just have to put in the equipment, and very quickly realized there's a lot of really interesting either people in the room and outside in the market that are thinking about how to partially electrify, and that can have lots of different meanings, meaning you leave half the system or you use some of your existing fossil fuel system on the coldest days of the years and only use your heat pump or electrified system on other days. And I think there's a lot of really innovative things that are coming out of that. So for people that are sort of sitting there stressing out, or catastrophizing is the word you used, about how do you rip out all this stuff, I think that's not necessarily the right strategy. And I think getting sort of partnered with firms that can help you think creatively about how to work within the grid capacity limitations you might have on your site, or to leverage existing equipment that still has 10 or 15 years left of useful life is a really important part of, I think, how we've reimagined in this panel the idea of resource efficient decarbonization. Sorry, new term for me and as a houser, trying to learn new things.
That's great. Those are both really, I want to pick up on those, and Rebecca, I want to sort of shift a little bit now to talk about the idea of a cohort and some of how that would work. And I think, Rebecca, I want to ask you, Ryan used the word anxiety, which I think is something we heard a lot about. And I think any New Yorker who's ever tried to invest in real estate feels that. And I think, there's anxiety about, am I getting good advice, right? And then there's anxiety about, if I buy something now, is it going to be the right thing in 5 years or 10 years? And so again, I'd love to hear from the perspective that you bring across your membership. And then Samantha, I'm going to ask you sort of a similar question from the housing side too. How can the Local Law 97 response and the cohort in particular here that we've been discussing be used as a way to alleviate some of those anxieties in your mind?
I think there's difference between anxiety over things that are decisions versus anxiety over potential solutions. And just before I go into the cohort model, boards have a fiduciary responsibility. That's the most important responsibility that they hold to their shareholders. And that is to make sure that what they're doing makes financial sense for everyone else in the building, because your home is usually your most valuable asset. And when costs go up to a certain extent and you can't afford it, everybody in the building suffers. We're all joint financially. So it's a different type of investment. So in terms of installing equipment today that is new equipment that may not be the right equipment in 10 years' time. There's a tremendous risk that's being borne by the co-op board in doing that. If you put in a heat pump system with, with a run of refrigerant that now is no longer allowed, there's a risk that the board took on. So I think that type of anxiety is different from the other anxiety that a cohort could cure. I don't think that they're exactly related. We at CMYC were born as a cohort almost, as a community. It was a bunch of West Side co-ops who got together to ensure that they could learn from each other best practices to better everybody's co-op. And that's how we were founded, and that's how we continue to this day. So we hold regular discussion groups, which are in essence cohorts of small buildings, cohorts of medium, cohorts of large buildings, where board members get together to discuss what they're doing, how, why, what problems they're facing, what are best practices. And some people call them therapy groups. I sort of against to that usually, but at the end of the day, people feel more secure in their decisions. And that type of anxiety definitely can be relieved by cohort.
And I just want to, I'll get to you, Jared, in a second, but Samantha, I want to sort of extend that same question to you because in a way, I think the regulated kind of affordable housing and co-op universe is similarly a cohort, whether it's intended that way or not. And from your point of view, how do you manage some of these sort of decision anxieties and also, again, the ability to say, well, this system is working, so it may not be the best system, but it might be the best system for right now. And how do you have those conversations, or do you?
I feel like right now, for those that might be a little less familiar, just super quick, the state as well as the city have a portfolio of regulated Mitchell-Ama condos and co-op sort of structure properties. And I think in that way, the state, I'll speak for myself here, operates almost as that cohort leader. And so, there might not be that feeling that all the Mitchell-Amas are coming together, but we're looking at it from that lens, like we have that view. And so I think one of the benefits in that from the regulated space is that we're able to say, okay, we see that these are the 4 most concerning performing properties in our portfolio, and then we take the approach of saying we're going to focus on those sort of weakest performers for whatever purpose it might be, financial or operational performance from equipment, and we'll really make sure that we're investing the state's funds that we have, which are limited resources, into those properties that are sort of the poorest performers. And I would hope in this future cohort model that we're proposing that the cohort would help support and take that same approach and really say, look, Penn South is coming in as a leader with all these great ideas, and maybe there's property ABC over here that can learn from Penn South, and we can help as a cohort to make sure we get funds for that property that's maybe struggling the most, and then sort of refunnel back around as people are getting lifted up. So I think that's the approach we sort of take inherently as a state portfolio, that it would hopefully be able to be replicated.
Thank you. And I don't know if there are questions from the audience, but we're going to make sure that I want to pause now, and if folks want to have some questions, and then we're going to get to kind of money and where this all goes next, but I do want to leave a bit of time if there's questions. Anybody has? No? Otherwise, I've got a lot. Yeah, go ahead.
First of all, thank you all. This is really interesting. I'm looking forward to reading the report. On the issue of anxiety, to me, one of the things that's been sort of unsaid, and I guess my question will be is, do you talk about this in the report? It's not so much anxiety about the finances or the challenges of doing this, because it's very hard, but it can be done to a greater or lesser extent. And I happen to live in a building who has done very well on all of these things. But the anxiety that board members have in my building and in other buildings that I work with is not so much that we won't do a good job of this or that we don't have the money for it. It's frankly that they will get sued, or that they will get voted out, that they will face personal consequences individually and as a board for putting their head above the parapet. Like we're doing a lot of programs in my building again, and the risk that we're discussing as a board about getting voted out or having issues is our maintenance is going to go up 7%, which has nothing to do with any of this. right? It has everything to do with property taxes and insurance, nothing to do with all the great things we're doing on sustainability and decarbonization. But we have to trim our sails on our projects, to make sure that we don't get voted out or sued or whatever. And you have to generalize that to buildings, especially buildings with board members who don't have a particular expertise or a vision or a plan in place. They don't want to get in trouble. And that's one of the big problems that I see as driving this whole discussion for co-ops in particular.
That's a great question, and I think I'll give a part of an answer because we heard a lot of this, and I think as a few folks have touched on, co-ops are businesses, and they are businesses that are fundamental to where many of us live. So it's not an abstract business; it's a really concrete business, and they are run for the most part by volunteer boards. I'm on a co-op board. I'm not an engineer. I can sort of read a report and ask some questions, but that's true of, I think, lots and lots of very large business co-ops here in New York. And so I think, again, part of what we hope and expect that an expanded and sort of formalized cohort network can do is to provide enough of an information sharing, and I think Rebecca's framing of this as therapy is actually dead on. Like, the ability to talk about some of those anxieties also does help, but also I think the ability to make some of those resources collective about what's working and what's not working is in fact also probably some level of legal protection, or at least makes you feel better about the decisions that you're making as a co-op board member. I want to make sure we get, I think there were a couple of other hands.
Yeah, I just have a quick question. Your cogen, my building had looked into cogen. Thank you so much. So my building had looked into cogen. I'm on the board of my building. And I'm wondering, how do you fuel the system? Because when we looked at it, it was natural gas. And then once Local Law 97 came into kind of the world, we decided to back off from that.
Exactly that. We use natural gas and diesel at the moment, and we're phasing off the diesel side and just going forward with the natural gas side. And the ability to purchase natural gas through called an interruptible rate provides us a discount, and natural gas is cheaper than diesel. So even though we're putting in these natural gas engines today, in the 10-year roadway that the city gave co-ops like ours to be in compliance, we will have a return on investment. And then how we use those engines in the future, if we do connect back to the grid, is subject for discussion, whether we use it for peak shaving, and we create a battery farm and produce cheaper electricity into that battery farm, come off the kind of grid and use the battery energy. We got multiple different ideas and concepts out there, and we're developing.
Just right up here, yes.
Yeah, okay, so, well, the thing is that, I'm Cletcher Smith, and I'm organizing with the, okay, so I'm organizing with the Food and Water Watch. So the reason why I came here, I called George's panel because the thing is that Governor, when I look at the board, it says Governor Hochul has confirmed to achieve the 2 million climate-friendly homes by 2030, which is now 5 years ago. So which means that when Governor Hochul needs to stand up for Trump. So my question is, can you talk more? How are we going to stop this pipeline? I'm not going to say it, but they said about the Stop Williams pipeline, which is the national grid.
I think certainly not by way of an answer to a very complicated question, other than to say that I think part of the underlying premise to all of this conversation is about the carbon composition of the grid that's coming in, that's feeding all of the electrification that's happening here. And obviously, the state and the regulated utilities are investing on a timeline horizon that is not within the city's control, certainly not within the co-op's control. But I think the underlying objective, certainly of Local Law 97 and of the folks that we heard from in the panel, has been to invest for the future with the understanding that that future will be a decarbonized grid. And I think the timeline and composition of that is an incredibly important topic for probably a different panel.
Could I just touch on this a little bit? So right now, National Grid in Brooklyn, they are before the Public Service Commission to approve almost $1 billion investment in their existing LNG facility, a facility that hasn't been used in over 10 years, and a facility that's part of a design day, meaning like the peak gas use period from 1935, a design day that no longer exists. So they're justifying this massive investment in this liquefied natural gas facility to serve a grid, right, for a peak that is probably never going to materialize because we have an All-Electric Buildings Act, we have Local Law 97, we're reducing gas consumption during the peak period, right? So one opportunity here is, instead of putting that almost $1 billion of ratepayer money into the LNG facility that will not be used, redirect the funding to reduce peak gas consumption within a cohort, maybe a co-op cohort, so that National Grid doesn't have to invest in a stranded asset. If you're angry about what I just said, you can email the Public Service Commission of the state of New York and tell them that the plan to approve this funding is really not aligned with state goals. So if we have a large cohort, right, if we have a large coalition, we could advocate for redirecting that kind of money into these purposes so that we could solve multiple problems at the same time.
In parallel, correct me if I'm wrong, Ryan, but I think Penn South and probably a number of the other cogen campuses could provide electricity for their neighboring buildings. Perhaps instead of Con Ed's 11% rate increase, we can continue to support our cogen campuses, think a tiny bit outside the box, and persuade Con Ed to also think about providing service without additional fees all the time.
Yeah, that's a great point. When I met Jared, I think it was 2020, we started talking about that. I just want to go back to the question you had. See, Penn South is unique in a lot of these tables because when we did a study on renewable energy, it didn't make sense for us because we produce electricity so cheaply that the useful life of that item would need to be replaced before we paid back any of it. But if we connect back to the grid, the equation flips on end, and then everything makes sense. So then we looked at, in the case of solar, we looked at, okay, maybe it's just a real estate play, right? We got a third party come in, invest, and pay us rent for our rooftops or our parking garage or something like that. And because we're not connected to the grid, they would have to make the connection back to the grid, to your point, feed back into the grid. Yep. But yeah, Jared has some unique ideas about ESCOs and all kinds of stuff with our plant. But
the problem with doing this, right, is that right, in the purest form of doing this, they'd have to do a bilateral contract with somebody else, right, which is risky. They would have to go into contract with another party. The best answer to this is to create a local development corporation, either publicly owned or jointly owned or something else, the DevCo, that can serve as the organization that can help bring excess electric capacity to a neighbor or excess heat to a neighbor. They produce a lot of waste heat when they're cooling their campus. That could go to a neighbor to make domestic hot water, right? This is a really important concept.
Where would regulators be on this?
So that is outside of the housing regulation, but I will say, I'm pausing because I don't want to get in trouble for saying this, so let's all pretend that I didn't say what I'm about to say. A housing agency like HCR and somebody in my position who talks a lot to my colleagues at DPS and at NYSERDA and DEC and Department of State has a very unique position to be able to bring these types of creative ideas that our housing groups, cohorts want to see, and to be able to advocate for any restrictive policy that might be in the way that is held by an outside agency that is not HCR, to have those conversations on your behalf. But we need to hear those requests to be able to then go advocate on your behalf, right, on the policy level. And I will say, there is a lot of stuff happening that as a state employee, we can't always talk about because that's how things work when they're in draft form. And I'm excited is sort of what I will leave you with some of the conversations that are happening.
If the city does what I just said, the regulator has nothing to say about it because the regulator can't regulate municipalities.
And I want to use that as a moment, I think, to wrap up. We've hit time, and I want to just sort of use that. It feels like a great place to stop because I think part of what we've spent a bunch of time in our collective many hours together sort of learning about, talking about, was, I think, a growing understanding of this as a collective opportunity and very much necessitating a collective effort. I started understanding this as a housing and energy problem. Elijah has thoughtfully added the public health aspect to it. It is also clearly a financing problem and also now maybe a local utility problem. But I think that the broadening of the collective understanding of the extent to which we are indeed in the same boat is, to me, the most encouraging thing I think that comes out of this, and I hope something that is comes through pretty loud and clear in our final report. I want to again thank the panelists as well as Building Energy Exchange, and then turn it back to Felix.
Thank you, John. I'm Felix Champa, the Executive Director of ULI New York. I want to just thank John and all the incredible panelists for the work that they did here. This conversation's been fantastic. The recommendations are amazing. Watching you all work in May and again today just reminded how committed you are to these issues. So thank you so much on behalf of ULI. I want to thank Richard Yancey and Building Energy Exchange. They hosted us here in May. For the work that the panel did to put all this together, hosting us again today. So thank you. And I want to just comment on the dedication and the commitment of the public servants that we have worked with on this. Will, Elijah, Katie, Joe, Jen, Samantha, all of you. I'm a former public sector person. I think whoever is mayor in January will be fortunate to have committed public servants like you working on issues like this for the city of New York. This is incredibly vital that we solve this, that we figure this out. So I'm grateful to all of you as well. I know there are many folks here who are a part of co-ops. Hopefully Rebecca and others, you will all QR code, share the report, disseminate it widely and broadly. Keep in touch with us. And our organization will continue to support MOCEJ in the work going forward. And co-ops and as cohorts are formed, we're here to continue to help and support. So thank you all for being here, and you can stay, I guess, a little bit and continue to talk, and maybe the panelists as well will answer questions. But again, thank you so much.